I must tell you that this afternoon is a wonderful privilege for us to be able to take you on a journey with us and to share with you what we have done over the last number of years and what we have achieved so far. And you will later hear from Tekela, one of our students who we're incredibly proud of. She's not the only one. We've got many of them, but we couldn't afford to bring them all along. But we want to take you with, and we want to share our journey with you and tell you that there's always hope and there's so many possibilities. What I have learned personally in this position, I previously headed up professional development, and when our first African CEO, Ignatius Uhuli, was appointed, he said, we've got to do something. But when I share with you our history, I want to take you back and you will know and understand. And I often equate sometimes the story of South Africa even to Malaysia, where they also had their own issues and their own people, the Bumiputras, at the expense of the Bumiputras, only certain other people were developed. And if one looks at what's happened to us, let us go with the journey together and let us take you through what we've done and what we've achieved on the program. And may this be an inspiration to you, that when you leave here today, you're going to sign up and say, what am I going to do and how am I going to make it a better world? Because the whole world, we battle with poverty, unemployment, and you will see some of the stories and what together we can achieve actually to make things so much better. Ntata, thank you.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness.
(1941). In his early 20s, Nelson Mandela moved to Johannesburg, where he first encountered the racial discrimination that would later become entrenched in law by the apartheid government.
It was when I came into the African National Congress that I realized that Xhosas are only a part of the African people. That the task of the ANC was to unite the African people and out of them build a nation.
1960, Sharpeville, a black township in the industrial area south of Johannesburg. A peaceful crowd gathered to protest against the pass laws was shot at by police. 69 people died.
Against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunity. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
At the age of 71, Mandela was released unconditionally.
Here before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people, a place the remaining years of my life in your hands.
After leading negotiations for a new South Africa, Nelson Mandela cast his vote in the first free and democratic elections and became the country's first black president.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
For the duration of his presidential term, and throughout what should have been a well-earned retirement, he has worked tirelessly to entrench the ideals he has so long stood for, becoming universally revered as an icon of leadership and humanity.
That makes one think. And being typical accountants, I've given you some statistics to show you some of the things that we battled with after all of this in 1994. And I'm quite sure a lot of countries in the world can relate to it. We had poverty in rural areas, 20 million people. That is a lot of people for a small country that's such as South Africa. Unemployment, 40%. Gender inequality, 60% unemployed African women. Child-headed households, 95,894. Child-headed households. Unbelievable. When one looks again to where we are in 2014, we still have poverty in rural areas. A lot has been done, but a lot still needs to be done. We still have unemployment, very, very high unemployment of 25.5%, very high. Gender inequality, we are ranked 17th out of 136 countries, according to the World Economic Forum. Again, we also battle in our country because of HIV, child-headed households, 92,716. And in our country, we're busy with so many infrastructural problems, but one of the biggest challenges we face is skill shortages. What do we do and how do we do it? Now, when one looks at our particular profession and you want to look at the past, in 1994, with the advent of elections, this is what our membership population demographics looked like. The 1994 population, South African population demographics, and have a look carefully at those percentages, bearing in mind the country and what we made up of. White people, 14%. African people, 75%. Colored, 8%. Indian, 3%. However, our membership statistics, when we started our programs, as late as 2002, you will understand and know how important it was for us to maintain our relevance and our position in our country. We had to do something about it because it was completely skewed. Our white membership statistics, 92%. And for the ladies, please have a look at the gender. Have a look at the gender statistics at that stage. African, we had only 229. Female, 93, 2%. Yet our population, 75%. Colored, 1%. Indians, 5%. So you can clearly see that when we as a profession had to sit back and say to ourselves, but we can't step back and say we've got a new government and we have a new regime and there's very little that we should be doing. We needed to actually step up to the plate and say, but what are we going to do and what processes are we going to put in place to be able to bring about this massive transformation? And I mean really serious transformation, not 5 or 10 people, but we needed to think of what do we do and how do we grow and develop people in becoming CAs in our profession. Now, we also realized that it's a long journey. It takes 7 years to qualify as a chartered accountant. And at that stage in our profession, many of the firms realized the necessity of doing something. But the biggest problem we were faced with is that, and I'm quite sure being accountants, very senior positions, you will know and understand, you can't reach and achieve certain of these goals when everybody is doing their own little bit somewhere. One recognizes the fact that they were doing a lot of work, but we weren't seeing the shifts we needed to see in our membership database at that particular time. We realized that in actual fact, if we were really serious about it, we needed to come up with a comprehensive strategy. And in this strategy, we realized again that each and everybody needed to play a vital role in transforming our profession. We couldn't do it on our own. We needed to form certain partnerships, but the biggest conversations we had was around pipeline. And I think it goes for anything in life. You've got to grow your own timber. There are no quick fixes. There are no magic wands. If we had to take people with us on the journey to see where we were going and how we were going to achieve it and what we were going to do. So the Tutuka model for our profession, and even within South African context and within our government, has become a model revered, because we start from, my new boss refers to it as cradle to grave, which is true. We start right at a school level, and we work through the various processes that it takes. And through all of them, as you can see over there, we start at a schools level. We do a career awareness, which we'll share with you quite a lot of work that we do around that. Undergraduate program, very, very focused interventions because it's building the pipeline. Initially, when we started with Tutuka, we had many challenges. We had to get, in our profession, all the regions organized to understand, please people, we need to play together. We need to have one strategy where everybody plugs in at various roles and various people play at various interventions, but our strategy is unbelievably clear. And within that, you can then choose, are you going to assist with school levels? Are you going to play in the undergraduate space? Where? Furthermore, we do a postgraduate level, obviously to qualify as a CA, a postgraduate program in accounting, auditing, all the subjects that you're well familiar with. And then they also take their professional assessments. Assessments, their professional exams, we refer to it as our qualifying examination. And at each and every one of those levels, we needed to put in interventions because we had many African and colored students, not even entering the pipeline as such, but stuck at one of those levels. So we needed, and as I said earlier, we needed to develop a comprehensive plan which actually looked at the whole pipeline, every aspect of it. We needed to align our plan to our own government's human resource development strategy. We had to identify at each and every one of those levels, what were the barriers? Because there are enormous barriers, and one can't just say, well, you're going to come up with a plan, one size fits all. Never works. We had to go and have a look. For example, we'll speak about it a little later through our panel members. One of the biggest challenges we faced with is the quality of our secondary schooling education, and I'll share with you some stats. The youngsters don't all take mathematics. And if you don't take mathematics, you have difficulty in entering higher education institutions, any of the sciences, medicines, chartered accountancy, actuarial sciences, anything. So to get the youngsters at an early age, and because we don't have enough educators, the youngsters generally don't take mathematics. So your pipeline at the very beginning becomes an enormous problem, getting the youngsters there. Massive issues around, if they do then get there, then they don't have funding. How do they go and study? We had to get through all of those issues. What are the kind of public-private partnerships we put together, which I will share with you, our panel members will share with you later. So for each and every level of our strategy, we developed very, very carefully thought through programs based on research, based on experience, based on what we've seen, where the youngsters battle, where at the undergraduate level, what are they battling with, how can we assist them, what do we do to get them nurtured throughout the entire pipeline. If you have a look at our country's education statistics, let me just quickly go back, and you have a look at that, you'll see that we're very proud of our position. We're number one in the world in terms of accounting and auditing standards. And that is based on the strength of our profession. However, we are number 144 out of 144 countries when it comes to the quality of maths and science education in our country. So you can appreciate and understand some of the issues we had to deal with, particularly when we have to start growing pipeline and getting the youngsters into our profession. Now, a very important aspect to grow the pipeline is about public-private partnerships. You will never, ever be able to achieve massive transformation if you don't have partnerships. You cannot do it on your own. Not if you sat back and looked at the quantum and the problem we had within our particular profession and in many of our other professions. You needed to form these public-private partnerships. And I would like to ask particularly Terence, our CEO, to speak about the importance of the government partnerships. And I would like then, moving on from Terence, Sizwe, the chairman of the Berkshire Fund, to speak to you about bringing business on board, employers on board. Everybody has an important role to play in this. Terence, would you maybe?
No,
Yes.
sorry. May I interrupt before we move on? Can you turn this on, please? I'm wondering whether it's possible to turn the lights on the audience. It's really hard to talk to the audience because we cannot see them at all. So if we can make it a little lighter in the audience, we can at least see whether you find it interesting what we are telling you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alta. Terence?
Thanks, Alta, for that interjection. And Chantal, thanks for the background that you have just painted. When it comes to the significance of the public-private partnership, in South Africa and specifically for this program, I mean, our government has been a wonderful supporter of this concept. Basically in two parts. One, as a key supporter of the access that we needed to have to the students at a school level, working with the Department of Basic Education to make sure that we have got coordinated programs that will enable us to identify the schools and the students that have got the talent and the potential to participate in the program of Tutuka. But above all, to participate financially as an equal partner to this program. And I guess in other jurisdictions, the role that I'm describing here is the role of a donor. But in this instance, our government has been the major donor. When what Sizwe is going to speak about, the business brings in the funding, the government would match that funding 50%, so that we have got a guarantee of having these students having adequate support throughout their studies for the entire 5 years of their university education in order to get to a level where they get assessed for competency as a qualified chartered accountants. But what's important here, which is the role that any institute can play, and which SAICA at the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants has played very magnificently, is the ability to project manage this mega project. Most governments, most donors, I can almost speak about this without any fear of contradiction, have got great ideas, but the ability to administer and project manage a project of this magnitude is something that they don't have the capability to do. And if we had not kicked in and come in as a profession to then provide that project management, this project would not have been as successful as Chantal is describing, and you'll hear being described by our fellow panelists. And in this respect, SAICA plays a full-time administrator of this project, linking up with the universities, linking up with the business, linking up with government, linking up with the students to make sure that nothing is left to chance. And as institutes, unless we play that role, we tend to miss an opportunity to make these projects of building pipelines and transforming our professions a good chance of success. And I'm saying this knowing that as South Africa, we're not the only ones. So we may have had 30,000 members when we started this project, but the reality is the vast majority of the population was never part of the accounting profession. So we were equivalent to basically starting from scratch as a profession. And as an institute, we needed to play an active role in making this a possibility.
Yeah, just to add to the point that the CEO of SAICA, as well as Chantal, is the head of transformation at SAICA. One of the key things, right at the beginning when we started with the Tutuga program, was for SAICA to take the lead in terms of creating vision, essentially for the accounting profession in a transforming country like South Africa. And that vision was particularly important because if you want to drive systemic change, if you want to change a system, you can't do it in small bits. And you've got to create a broad vision, and after you've done that, just like we run a lot of our businesses, as well as work in government departments, you've got to get people who are passionate to drive the process. And thirdly, if you want to change a system, you can't sort of think of that system in the context of a silo. In other words, the profession owns this IP or intellectual property, and we're going to be the only ones to do it. You've got to bring other parties, and in doing so, you've got to also be prepared to give away something, to get something. And this is what SAICA was able to do. In other words, when it comes to branding the program, it was obviously agreed that it would be called the Tutuga Bursary Program. But if you're going to bring government and business, especially business, often business thinks of corporate social investment in the context of what they're going to get in return. What they're going to get, if they're not going to get anything in return, and very often we see companies put banners with their names and their brands around an initiative so that they feel good about themselves, they feel that like they're doing something positive. It was really important here to say to companies, you're investing for the transformation of the profession as a whole. Yes, you'll get a return on that investment by mere fact that you're going to get accountants who are now supplied into the system, who are supplied into the economy, both for the audit firms or the professional firms as well as the private sector. And secondly, it was important, obviously, and I know we're going to talk, Professor Alex van der Walt is going to talk about the role of universities. It was important to hold all the different stakeholders accountable for the roles that they were playing. So government was accountable not just for providing the money, they were accountable for making sure that they were creating all the necessary conditions for success for the initiative. The profession was there to provide not just the funding, but also the training platform to make sure that this pipeline of students that Chantal was talking about actually happens. And the private sector brings not just the funding, they bring the funding, but also they bring to the profession a lot of inputs in terms of what kind of accountants do you want to create in the country. And therefore, when you create the competency framework that produces the students that on day one of serving their traineeship are useful in the system, what kind of students do we want? Because we all know that very often universities produce students and they get into the workplace, they probably take about 2 years before they figure out, before they're useful in the company. So creating an environment where business felt they have a role to play in defining what kind of training is required and creating an environment where inputs can be made in terms of the kind of competency framework has become really, really important. And part of what business is always going to be interested in is, is this thing working? And very often, in any change of system, people initially start very slowly, they are very skeptical and so on. But the proof, based on the results that were coming out, actually encouraged a lot more companies to come on board. So we had a situation where the success breeds more success. So as the program was succeeding, it actually became like the program in the country. And I must say, and Chantal talked a little bit about it, that the program has been now identified as the best professional development program for the country, for South Africa's Human Resources Development Plan. So we've taken the best practice out of development and training of accountants as the best practice that is now today used in South Africa as part of the Human Resources Development Council, which is meant to grow our economy by 3 times the rate of growth that it is achieving today. So it is now used for medical doctors, for engineers, for actuaries, the same model that was actually initiated by SAICA. And that is about changing the system.
Thank you, Sizwe. So you can see about the importance of public-private partnerships. You've seen on the diagram, everybody has got a role to play. And as Sizwe mentioned earlier, it's about accountability. Everybody is accountable. For no matter what we do, there's accountability because we've got to measure it. Now, the Tutuka model itself, we do a lot of work at a schools level. We do maths Olympiads, accounting Olympiads. We do maths camps, youth seminars, career drives. But we also, again, we don't do it on our own. We involve commerce and industry, involve members. And Mark, I'm sure you can share a lot of your experiences in the work that we do around schools and that kind of thing.
Thank you, and good afternoon. We've seen a video and had a lot spoken about the state of education in the country. Clearly, before 1994, education was intentionally poor for the black community. That has changed over time, but it's still not at the standard that it should be. And as we saw, our mathematics education is at a particularly low standard. Mathematics is an essential part of the education required for an accountant. Similarly, English isn't the first language of almost all these potential students that we have, and in some cases it might be their third language. So when looking at the strategy, we realized very early on that we needed to concentrate on developing a pipeline in the schools, and that wouldn't just happen by leaving the system to run itself. So we've had intervention after intervention at these schools. This year, for example, we could see over 80,000 students and try and introduce them, firstly, to the concept of a chartered accountant, and secondly, to try and improve the maths and English standard. Believe it or not, a lot of potential students don't even know what a chartered accountant is. If one lives in a rural area, you're very unlikely to have met a chartered accountant over your 15 or 18 years in the rural area. And most of the bright kids all want to be doctors or lawyers because that was the profession that everybody spoke about, and they knew what a doctor and a lawyer did. So the first initiative, starting back 10 years ago, was to make sure that people in the rural areas in particular understood what a chartered accountant did and the excitement of what the profession could offer them. That meant that we went with interventions from school to school and introduced the children to the accounting profession. The next bigger challenge was to try and improve the standard of the output of the schools. And for that, as you saw, we've run numerous programs, and business has got involved with adding finance for teachers, introducing computer labs at schools, funding the hardware that's required for that. And so we've worked our way across the nation, and we'll see in a slide just now, we've covered the whole nation trying to improve the standard of the students. And the impressive results have been that there are many, many more students now coming out of the school curriculum with higher mathematics, which you have to have for accounting, and we've done that by ensuring that at the early stages when they make their elections, they don't take the lower mathematics curriculum, which is not suitable for an accountant. We've worked endlessly to get this pipeline flowing, and I'm pleased to say that the number of applications that we get for bursaries now is probably 10 times the number that we could finance. And so we can select the top cream of the crop to put them onto our funded bursary programs. But we've got to realize that we're in competition, and those top students are also being targeted by the medical profession, by engineers, by actuaries, etc. So we don't get all the students we'd like, but certainly the pool is now growing, and it's growing very quickly to ensure that there are enough candidates for us to put through the secondary education level.
Thank you, Mark. So as you can see, and Mark mentioned earlier, for those of you, we've just included a slide, it might not mean a lot, but our provinces in our country, and we get to every province. We get to the most rural areas, that we have teams out there. Years ago when we started Tutuka in 2002, so it's not that long ago, we started in the Eastern Cape. And the Eastern Cape, for any of you who know, it's the heart of actually our ANC government. Madiba came from the Eastern Cape. Many of our leaders today came from the Eastern Cape. And there's a university which we refer to in our country as an HDI, historically black university. In those years in apartheid, no African child had the privilege of studying at a white university. You had your homeland universities. And they were generally always under-resourced, not the quality of people over there to be able to assist them. So you can imagine, the little bit of money that the parents had, they paid to put their children, and then they weren't necessarily getting what they were expecting. The children couldn't go and study, they couldn't work, they just had all sorts of difficulties. And that was one of the first universities, and we decided to work in the Eastern Cape. And the University of Fort Hare, situated in Alice, very far from an airport, middle of nowhere. But we started because we knew that if we could understand and work in that space, we would. And that was with, which Terence referred to earlier, government funding that we got. And I've got the big picture up in our offices, our first 67 million rand, and we started working with the students, and we were building capacity at that university because we wanted the university to be strong. We wanted the university to offer a BCom accounting degree that could compare to the best of the best. And during this process, we could only take 100 students because that's enough funding that we had. And we were busy spreading our gospel to everybody. And then the youngsters said, but we want to become CAs, but we had no bursary fund. And then we realized, well, we're going to have to set up something different. But the beauty of us working at the University of Fort Hare, we learned critical key lessons when you start working with the higher education institutions. Because in South Africa, and I think many of the other professional bodies, we accredit. We're not a provider, we accredit providers to offer our programs. So we accredit the universities. And we wanted to get Fort Hare accredited, as I said, but we worked on the Tutuka program there, and we realized some key fundamentals that we needed to put in place when we set up our particular Tutuka bursary fund. Now, when we went to the undergraduate level, we realized that we needed a dedicated program coordinator. We needed full financial support because in our country, people do give money, but they don't give enough money. And they set the youngsters up for failure. Then the youngsters don't have food, the youngsters don't have access to textbooks. There's a whole host of things that the youngsters battle with. So we needed to make sure that we provided full financial support. We looked after the youngsters in the entirety. We then also built into our programs work readiness and soft skills. We insisted on a whole host of things that we wanted the universities to have accommodation. And obviously, Professor van der Walt will speak to us now about the universities. One of our biggest challenges, your old white universities, so-called white universities, were not set up for rural children. They were set up for urban children, came in every day, commuted. So we had an enormous problem of accommodation, shortage of accommodation at the universities. So when we started our Tutuka Bursary Fund, our chairman, Sizwe will recall, in 2005, we had very, very, very difficult discussions with some of the VCs those years, particularly around, we want accommodation, we want a program manager, we needed certain things so that we could make sure that our youngsters were protected through the process on the journey and assisted where they possibly could. But Alex, wouldn't you like to speak about the particular issues around the undergraduate program and when we introduced it, what was faced by the universities as well, because it was very new and very different?
Thank you very much, Chantal. Yeah, as a university, we were really honored to be part of this amazing partnership since its inception. And what an amazing journey I think it has been. I gladly will share some of our experiences and maybe touch on some of what can be described as key success factors if you want to deliver a program, a good program as part of this partnership. I think those of you that's working at universities or have some exposure to universities will know that, that it's all about research. And specifically in South Africa, we now have more and more that universities are focusing on rankings, international rankings, and that you really only achieve through research. And there's always the risk that departments of accountancy will not be allowed to focus on professional education. I think what this partnership achieved is that we have agreement with all the universities in South Africa, and they're on board to allow their departments of accounting to focus on professional education and also to focus on research. Now, of course, it's competing interests and it's competing priorities. Now, I think it's so important that we do that, and this focus on professional education allows universities in South Africa, and specifically departments of accounting, to be responsive to national needs and to be responsive to national imperatives, of which scarce skills and skills development and transformation is one. Part of this focus on professional education for us is this very close relationship with industry and the profession. And Siswe and Mark touched on it, but it's for us extremely important to talk to the profession, talk to industry on a regular basis, so that we know that the type of student that we develop is what the industry actually look for. And I think the second very important point is that what we quickly realize when we started off with Tutuka, now at that stage, as any good department of accounting, we had a teaching and learning model. And when we embarked on this journey of transformation and growth, we realized that it's not just good enough to have a teaching and learning model. You need a teaching and learning model that is student-centered, and therefore one that understands, but not only understand, but also respond to your student body. Now, Mark touched on the student body a little bit, but I just maybe want to touch on a few other important points. Of course, I'm honored to work with the young people on a daily basis. And those of you that's working with young students and young accounting students will know that they're energetic, they want to learn, and they're eager to learn. But I think you understand the context now of the setbacks. And what is important to understand is that most of our students are first-generation students. So they're first in the family that really have the opportunity to go to university. They have no or limited context of business. I do often hear my students saying to me, but if they just had the opportunity to sit around a dinner table at night talking to their parents about business. So what we often find in class is that you talk about concepts that you as the lecturer think your students understand, and they really don't have the background to that. So we needed to work all of this into our teaching and learning model. Then there's enormous pressure to perform. So especially where we have students coming from rural areas where the financial support from the Tuka is there, but there's also the it's a broader community that support the student, and with that support, of course, and also through the accountability of the program, there's this pressure on the students to perform, and that is something that we need to take into consideration all the time. We talked about the weak schooling system, and specifically in terms of mathematics, and we also talked about the fact that the language of instruction is sometimes the second or even third language of our students. So it's important for us as a university, and any university that's part of this program, and it's part of this accountability to reflect on an ongoing basis in terms of our teaching and learning model. And that makes it fairly labor intensive. You need that commitment from your lecturers. That's where this competing interest sometimes comes in terms of research versus additional focus on your students. We often talk about our hidden curriculum. And apart from your formal curriculum, where you try to achieve all of these additional things, in your hidden curriculum, it's important that your students feel that you care, that they're part of this program, that you're part of the team, and that you want them to succeed. We have a lot of focus on the development of context, specifically in terms of business context, also in collaboration with business and with the profession, with business games, for instance, in the first year, just to give them this context of business that they require for accounting programs. And then a lot of additional programs that Chantal already talked about to increase proficiency and in English or the language of instruction. So I think the important thing is that what all universities in South Africa realized as part of this journey as part of the TUCO program is that it was not just business as usual. It really took from us reflection, ongoing reflection and change to respond effectively to the needs of our learners. The next point that I just want to touch on is that I think, again, one of those things being at university that there will always be pressure on success rates. And it's always easy if you want to achieve good success rates is just to take the cream of the crop. What we realized soon in this program is that if we want to achieve real transformation, it is extremely important that we do not only get our students from private schools, but that we do get students from rural areas. That transformation is really about giving those people the opportunity that would not have had the opportunity. I think Mark also touched on this. Then, and I have two last points. What is also extremely important for us was that students need, as part of this program, role models. And therefore, you need the transformation of your faculty demographics as well. So at all universities in South Africa, if you looked at the demographics of the faculty, 10, 15 years ago, that was mainly white. And it was extremely important as part of this program that we also transform the demographics of faculty. Now, of course, the moment if you start doing that, then you have challenges in terms of attraction of good people. Especially in the business environment, and I have my colleagues here where people can, or graduates can earn much bigger salaries, and why will they go to university? I can say that business also and the profession assisted us there to make sure that we get good role models that come to academia. I want to just highlight two programs. The one is the academic trainee program where, as part of the training, trainees can spend a year at academia to see and that's a psycho-specific program. And we have quite a lot of success where most of those that spend time as academic training, or part of the academic training, then come back to the university. The second program that I just want to highlight is that we also receive salary subventions to subvent the salaries of our academics through a training level through the profession. And I think if it wasn't for those, then it would not have been possible to, I think at all universities, change the demographics of the faculty staff. Then Chantal touched on the additional support and commitment from universities. I think if you look at all the universities in South Africa that's involved in this program, it's really the case that they have come to the party. I want to use the example at my own university. Chantal talked about residences. We also had a problem with residences, and our university management put up a residence costing the university in the order of 15 million euro, just for our TUCO students. We also in our department have full-time mentors, we have specific coordinators, we have project managers, we have psychologists just working on the specific program. And then, of course, I think at a lot of universities, we also found that what was necessary was specifically to have more capacity in terms of computer labs and all of that, and to bring that into it. But overall, I think it has been an amazing journey for academics that's involved in this. And of course, there's the accountability, and that's extremely important. So we have the TUCO chairman that on an ongoing basis, and at least once a year, have contact with our vice-chancellors of the universities to make sure that these programs run smoothly. Thanks, Chantal.
So as you can see, it's a journey. We're not there yet. Most of it, in our country, we've got 17 universities. We have got 9 of them, particularly, which run our TUCO programs. And there's still a long way to go. Part of becoming a CA, obviously, is you've got to enter into a training contract, and they're still all about trainees. Now, here again, I would like us to just, from the Tutuka perspective, what happens to our youngsters? And I'd like here, I would ask Terence just to, from a public sector perspective, just to specifically explain to you how involved we are within the public sector and the training environment we've created there. Mark, from commerce perspective. And then, Sizwe, again, if you would just speak about, you touched on it earlier, funding. None of this is possible without sustainable funding. And we can never, ever leave our students in the lurch where you find that the students, halfway through their studies, one of the donors can't fund anymore. So I want you just, as the chairman, just to share some of the ideas and the things we've put together to ensure that they funded appropriately and they placed appropriately all the way through the journey until qualifying as CAs. Terence?
Thanks, Adele. Let me start on the story of the public service. And this is a story that I think most countries can relate to. And this is going to take me back to my previous role as the Auditor General in South Africa, where from a visionary perspective, we said, if you are to transform the disciplines in government, our office has got to be professionalized first. Because if you work from a position of a professional outfit, then we will be taken seriously. And as way back as 2000, which is 14 years ago now, I mean, we had less than 10 qualified chartered accountants in that office. Today, this is the 6th employer of chartered accountants in South Africa, 14 years later. With more than 500 chartered accountants. And I'm not counting those that have qualified and left and became part of the civil service. And as part of that number, there is a bigger number that is coming through the Tutuka Bursary Fund program as well, to augment the sustainability of the skilling of the civil service. I guess I'm telling this story to say, in any jurisdictions, the audit offices have got immense capacity to partner with the institutes. And we're talking here about audit offices that, if I tell the South African story, 14 years ago, once again, when the international standards of auditing were introduced, we adopted them. That was way before the adoption of the e-size in 2010 by Intosai. By the time e-size became a formal reference point for public sector auditors, we were already in that space because we had a professional outfit within ourselves. And we did that because we were partnering very closely with the Institute. And therefore, that partnership, I think, is important to be respected. And because of that experience, that rubbed off to other departments within the civil service, namely the Treasury. When I listened to Ian Ball yesterday, the other day when he was receiving his prize, and saying that, he had to spearhead a program, basically given a blank check by government to spearhead a program of accrual accountancy in New Zealand. These are the programs that even our National Treasury is now beginning to spearhead through, once again, skilling the Treasury itself. And that is going to rub off to the rest of the other departments. And remember, in South Africa, the issue of accrual accounting is a constitutional imperative. Accrual accounting is a constitutionally enshrined principle. It's also a principle that is enshrined in the finance management legislation. And therefore, all these issues are issues that from way back as an audit office, we started to raise as important as part of the vision that the country has had when it achieved its independence. And as a profession, once again, these are the opportunities we have to be part of building a nation, part of making our nation to be part of the progressive world and society out there. So those are some of the stories I can tell about the public sector. In terms of the future, maybe Chantel is going to come back again, because I think it's important to say, how are we now taking these pilots, which have proven to be so successful, and raising now awareness as part of the national campaign to get the whole of government to be properly professionalized. And that's the next journey and the next step that we now embarking upon as part of some of the thoughts that initiated from the Tutuka Bursary Fund program.
Thanks, students.
Thank you. Having been a CFO for 30 years in listed companies until recently this year, it's always been an issue to try and find enough chartered accountants for your accounting departments. And the Tutuka Bursary Fund and the Tutuka strategy was an answer to Commerce's prayers, in effect, in that it was a way to channel effort from commerce and industry through these joint partnerships that you've seen. And so what does commerce and industry, how do they play their part? We'll hear in a second. A big part is obviously to provide money, and they have to provide bursaries, and they need to commit, as we heard earlier, for at least a 3-year period, because you can't put a kid in varsity and then next year say, sorry, we haven't got any money for you. What does commerce get out of that? Because every CFO says, so what's my return on investment? Your return on investment is that after the 3 years of contributing, a year later, you will get a candidate allocated to you who has been successful in his university qualifications, and he or she could do their articles or their training contract with you in commerce and industry. If you're prepared to wait a little longer and that person went through one of the auditing firms and did their training contract there, you would get a fully qualified chartered accountant. And they are scarce as hen's teeth. And if you're looking for black chartered accountants, we'll see the numbers. They are still a very scarce resource. And clearly government has an initiative, correctly so, to try and have business starting to represent the demographics of the country. So there are various legislations that require you to meet various levels of having a number of black accountants within your departments, etc. So here is a bursary fund that can help you do that and achieve these targets. And where else does commerce contribute? We've heard all through the discussions that a mentoring system is essential to having success in this program. And commerce and industry can produce some of those role models that we spoke about for these students. And the students are assigned to specific people within the corporations. And these students can go and work in their holidays from university. They can have contact on a regular basis with these mentors. And this is seen as a huge, huge initiative in commerce as part of the transformation and sustainability of business South Africa today.
Yeah, just talking about funding and sustainable funding, one of the critical success factors of the Tutuka program was the way that it was pitched and the way that the institutional framework was actually set up. What do I mean by that? Right at the beginning, when we started with the Tutuka program, it was really a great idea, again, just talking to the vision of SAICA, to say the trustees of the Tutuka program, because of its importance, are going to be the CEOs of the big audit firms. You have 5 big audit firms in South Africa. There's going to be a representation for the private sector at the highest level, not at the level of the CFO, at the level of the CEOs. And the same applies to how we then contract with universities and how we contract with government. So as far as government is concerned, as an example, we interact at the level of the minister and the director general of the department. And at the universities, we contract at the level of the vice chancellor, not the head of the School of Accounting. Why is this important? It's important because we can get really quick decisions. We can get commitments which people cannot vary. So if I go with Chantal, with the CEO of SAICA, to a company to go and raise funding, typically, I know there are a lot of CFOs who are full in the room here. We don't want to meet with the CFO. We want to meet with the CEO of the company because we want a commitment for at least 3 years for that company, and we will not typically interact with the CSI department somewhere because it is really important that people understand that this is not about corporate social investment. It is about skills development in the country. And therefore, we need the commitment at the highest level. So all these parties, like at the level of the minister, at the level of the CEO of SAICA, at the level of the vice chancellors, come to the party understanding that this is not just corporate social investment, and it does take 7 years to produce an accountant. Therefore, we need long-term committed funds to be able to achieve it. And, we talked about accountability earlier on. We hold the universities as a private sector now because, people understand the issue, the principle of accountability much better. So we hold SAICA accountable as a private sector in terms of what SAICA is going to deliver, the throughput pass rates of the students that are in pipeline. They in turn have to hold the universities accountable to deliver the throughput pass rate. The universities in turn have to hold the students who are going to study after all accountable. So the students actually sign contracts that they are prepared to study, they're prepared to do extra work. So when other kids on a Friday night are going off to parties, our students, and you hear later on, our students at Tutuga are writing tutorials, are writing tests on weekends. Because if you're trying to deal with the gap of a poor education system, you can't just do normal. You have to do twice as hard to achieve the kind of success. So the students are not just there as spoiled brats who are getting not just bursaries. They get to stay at the best residences, they get all the stipends, but we also encourage the students to give back. So all the cohorts of students in different universities, in all the 8, 9 universities that we have to adopt their own social responsibility project. Because what we're trying to build here are leaders of the future. It's not just accountants. We're trying to build people who come from the villages, who go on to become leaders of the country. And they must understand that with all the benefits that they are getting, there is a responsibility in return. So the system has sort of been constructed to make sure that there are accountability checkpoints at each step of the way to make sure that it succeeds.
In fact, if I may just close the loop just on what Sizwe has touched on from the public sector perspective. It is a model that is defined and modeled in this manner that has made us to now start a campaign to speak with all the government structures, nationally and provincially. Once again, as Caesar says, we're not talking at lower levels, we're talking at the level of the premiers, or in other jurisdictions, premiers are governors of states. These are the people we're engaging with. And up to now, we're pleased to see that, 2 of the provinces have made decisions to participate in this program. KwaZulu-Natal government, which is basically the biggest province of South Africa in every respect, as well as Gauteng province, which is the capital basically of Africa when it comes to commerce. Not South Africa, Africa. That premier or governor has come to the party. And we are hoping that with those commitments, we are going to now be able to convince all the national departments as part of professionalizing the government structures to be part of this program. And it works. The model is indisputable. And it's just making it easy for us to then transform our country using something that has been tried and tested over the last 10 years.
Well, let's hear what our students say, because I think at the end of the day, it's about them and how are they achieving and what they have achieved.
When I was growing up, life wasn't easy. It was always hard, but I knew that one day I'll go somewhere. So the only way I could do that, I knew that it was through education. Sitting here, I have my own car. I pay my own way. I live alone. I'm able to sustain myself and my family with the little that I have. And I know it doesn't stop here because I'm still going forward with my profession.
My name is Sinesifa Maninja, and I'm a qualified chartered accountant. I was funded by Tutuka in the MMU program, and I'd like to thank them and congratulate them on their anniversary for 10 years and providing transformation to this profession. Thank you very much.
Amazing stuff.
My name is Kaya Sitole. I qualified as a chartered accountant at the First Rand Banking Group, which is where we are right now. And I have been involved with the Tutuga Bursary Fund for the past 5 years. And on this 10th anniversary of this great initiative, I'd like to congratulate all the stakeholders for all the contribution that they've made to the transformation of this profession.
I want to just mention, I know our time is short and I would like Tukela to come up to the capacity building projects, and I think we mentioned them early on. We've involved in our country, we're speaking about our homeland universities, where the University of Fort Hare is now a fully accredited university. The University of Limpopo, it used to be the University of the North previously, is accredited, and we're busy with 3 capacity building universities. Walter Sisulu University, if ever any of you are in South Africa, please come and have a look at the work that's being done there, where we take a weaker university and we twin them with a strong university. And I think within our own context as a profession, there's so many opportunities for us to be able to work together and strengthen our profession, because I still have this dream, and I said to Alta when we were discussing, where we actually share out academics amongst these institutions, where we've really worked to make sure that the standard is at the level where they, where we all ascribe to be. So that's something that I wish I had more time that I can share with you, because the work that we've done there is quite amazing. We're working actually with the Institute of Namibia now on their Polytechnic and their university, where we again twinning our strong universities to build capacity, because that's the only way you actually really develop sustainability in the future, particularly in our profession. I'd like to end before Tukela, just to speak to you briefly about where we now. Our student stats so far, bearing in mind, we've only started really the bursary fund in all earnesty in 2005. We've got 117 qualified CAs, 573 honours degrees, in excess of 700 degrees. Our member stats is what makes us happy as well, because we've tackled each area of the pipeline. We've got 9% of our members, and you recall the initial ones, 1%, 2% around there. We've got 3% coloured, 11% Indian, 77% white. And the greatest thing for us is when you really start looking at the new members who register, because you can't really look at the stats in total. You must look at who comes in. And those stats, more than 30% are now African and coloured, and 50%, ladies, women. 50%. So we're very proud. In closing, Alta, I would like...
Before we close, Chantel, I think it's important that, all the story that we've told about Tutuga represents basically phase 1 of SAICA being an inclusive institute. We're still looking at other visionary programs and projects where we now say, how do we now take care of those people that may have had a wrong step in their life in their ambitions to become accountants? And that's the next step that we're now pursuing, so that no one who wants to be an accountant, who desires to be an accountant, a chartered accountant in particular, can say, because I started on the wrong footing, therefore my career is shattered. That's the next step that we're working towards as part of the capacity building and the inclusivity of the profession here.
Thank you, Terence. Tukela, would you like to come and share your special story with all our people today?
Wow, I'm nervous. Ladies and gentlemen, as Alta has introduced me, my name is Tukelo Sekese, and I'd like to say it out loud. I am proud to be a Tutuka CA. I qualified in 2011 and today work at Investec Bank, an international bank that is renowned around the world on the FTSE 100. And I must say, it's truly humbling that 10 years ago, becoming a CA was but a dream, and it seemed to be fading away from me. In 2004, I was completing my final year in high school in a small industrial town, a daughter of a pensioner and a hardworking teacher. My parents had always taught me that with hard work, anything was possible. And I, to an extent, believed this and really worked hard to achieve good grades. I participated in sport. I wasn't always good, but I did my best to become a well-rounded student. And Around June that year, I was applying for universities, and in South Africa, you have to pay a fee to send your application form forward. So I go to my father and I say, I need 200 Rand for the application. And he lost his temper on me, and I couldn't understand, what did I do wrong? I didn't know it was a mistake to apply for university. And later on, my mother explained to me that they were already struggling to meet the 450 Rand per month school fees at the school where I was, because they had tried to propel me into a school that was going to give me opportunities. And that the 30,000 Rand that they would have needed for tuition fees alone, they couldn't afford, and I had to make another plan. My world was shattered. How was I, in spite of all the hard work, going to be sitting at home the following year? Anyway, being the persevering young woman I was, I started applying for any bursary there was out there. And at the time, I don't think I'd really decided what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew I wanted better. And fortunately or unfortunately, I qualified for an engineering bursary. This was around July, and I was devastated. I wanted to study, but I knew I didn't want to wear safety boots to work every day. And around that time, Ntato, who currently runs the Tutuka Fund, came to our school and spoke about a chartered accountant. Now, there is a chartered accountant in a distance relation of ours, but I never knew what he does. I just know he's a businessman. So as Ntato was speaking, and the kind of attributes that they look for in a chartered accountant, the kind of work that a chartered accountant gets to do, I thought, this is what I need to do. This is where I'm meant to be. So I again go home and have a difficult conversation with my parents. I tell them, I think I found something I'm passionate about. And it's not engineering, so I can't sign that contract. Again, my dad loses it on me. And he says, being a child of a teacher and knowing that I don't bring in any income, you should be aware that you can't follow your passion, that passion is just a luxury. And that you, at this point, will have to do what you have to do. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting at home. And at the time when Tato came, I started applying for the Tutuka bursary. I signed the other engineering contract, but I'd applied for Tutuka anyway. Tutuka calls me in, I do the interviews, and fortunately, I qualify for the bursary. And I still remember that day. I was doing my maths homework on the dining room table when the phone rang. I jumped up, and on the other end, they told me, you've got the bursary. It was one of the happiest days of my life. And not only was I going to get a tutorial fee paid for, but my school books would be paid for, residence, and I'd get additional pocket money on top of that. I was elated. But what I didn't know is exactly how lucky I was, because Tutuka was different from any other bursary fund that there was on campus. We called it the Equity Program, and this program stood on 3 pillars. The first being Ridira Moho, meaning we work together. Second being excellence, and the third Tutuka, meaning to develop. And we lived every single day according to these 3 pillars. Firstly, we had to show up to university a week early before the universities actually opened. And we were taught the most basic of skills. Well, to the general person, they would seem basic. So anything from note-taking, work-life balance, managing your finances, computer skills, even emotional intelligence. We all stayed in the same residence, and we were organized into small groups where we had a mentor allocated to each group. We organized social events quarterly, attended tutorials together, and really did work together to help each other along the way. The program also encouraged for us to do the best we could. So every June and December, which is normally when the school's closed, we'd have a top 10 ceremony, and all the special performers would do well. And every now and then, head office would come, and Chantal would come and tell us, you have a responsibility for your families and communities. So this really stuck with us. Also, during the holidays, we would be required to take a pack home and volunteer at our schools and tutor maths and accounting. And this created a social conscience in us. I mean, as we speak, most of us are involved in an NGO of some sort in our lives right now. The program eventually gained an elite profile on the campus, and more people wanted to join. This was not because we were the cool kids, no, not by any chance. In fact, we had to put in more hours and attend additional tutorials for about 2 of our major subjects every year. But people appreciated that the support we were getting was contributing to our performance. The Tutuka kids started taking up top ranks in this university programs. Looking back, I think I understand what the key differentiator was with Tutuka. They understood that transforming the profession required not only throwing money at the problem, but understanding that a majority of the students come from schools where they were likely to be the only one that qualified for university entrance. They were probably the only one that persevered to take maths at the right level so that they could qualify for a CA program. They were probably the first person in their family or community to have entered university. Or they were taught maths, English, and accounting in Sotho or Zulu. And at university, this was taught in English, which meant that it reflected as poor literacy skills. They understood that problem was not just entering university. You had to make it through university. After that, you had to do your training articles and shine enough so that you are a well-rounded CA that was highly employable. This meant that they had to empower us so that when I stand next to a Joe Soap, whose father has been in business all his life, and he has known what a boardroom is all his life, has gone to a private school where he was taught exam technique, presentation skills, I can hold my own. And I think it really hit me when a good friend of mine, Theo Neil Adams, passed away in a car accident just weeks after we got our CTA or honors results. To me, Theo was just a good friend, a hardworking guy, but, just a good friend. We went down to his town, Nikkekshoop, and I realized that Theo there was a hero because he had been the first person in that entire town to have left the Northern Cape and gone to Joburg to study. Not just that, he had gone through university and gotten an honors degree. And they had, the primary school kids in the town had all made a play in honor of Theo Neil, and there was an award in his name. And that's when I really realized how changing one person's life can change a whole community. What is more is that there were 2 other people in that hall who were on the Tutuka program that had been recruited by Theo. So Tutuka had changed 3 other lives who would then change more lives. And that is the Tutuka story. It is not only my story, it is not only Theo's story, but a story of 117 of us. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say I'm a Tutuka CA.
During this presentation, I made several notes that I wanted to share with you, but I'm not going to. I want to leave you with Tukelo's story, and I want you to use all your senses, and particularly your voice, to spread the word. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I realize that we have a few minutes left for questions, but even this moment, I don't even think I want to fill it with questions. The panelists are going to be here. You can access them and ask them any questions you may wish. I wish you a wonderful afternoon, and please help me thank the panelists again.